Thank you everybody for joining us today. On this video, we're going to go through why does South Sudan have five vice presidents? Interesting question. Uh, Pay attention to the video and we'll explain to you why South Sudan has five vice presidents. Let's go. So we're going to give you the brief history of background of South Sudan. South Sudan gained its independence in 2011 on July 9th from Sudan. And when South Sudan gained its independence, the first president, who's still the current president, was President Salva Kiir Mayardit. General Salva Kiir Mayardit was the president, and the vice president was Dr. Riek Machar Tany. They were members of the SPLM. This is a ruling party known as the Sudan People's Liberation Movement, and this was the movement that led South Sudan to independence. It was a movement that waged a liberation struggle against the government of Sudan from 1983 to 2005, when the SPLM signed an agreement with the government of Sudan known as the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. This agreement that had provisions in it for a referendum, and then this referendum was done in 2010, and the people of South Sudan voted overwhelmingly, 98%, to be an independent country. So 2011 come around, you have one vice president at the time. And then in December 2013, conflict happens and the SPLM is split. Riek Machar, who was the vice president, created another political party known as the SPLM in opposition. It's Sudan People's Liberation Movement in opposition, known as the IO. Some political detainees who were detained during the crisis in 2015 created something called the SPLM FD or G10. G10 refers to the 10 detainees, but they later called themselves the FDs, known as the former detainees. This first conflict was ended in 2015 when the parties signed the agreement on the resolution of conflict in South Sudan in Addis Ababa. And this agreement created two vice presidents. That's when the increase of vice president. One vice president was given to the SPLM-IO. Another vice president was given to the SPLM. The first vice president was Dr. Riek Machar Tany, came back. And the vice president was Dr. James Wani Iga, who was a former speaker, and he replaced Machar in 2013 as the vice president. In July 2016, fighting erupted in Juba. Machar fled Juba, and then his SPLM-IO replaced him with Taban Dengai as the first vice president, and Wani Iga remained as the vice president. Then you started having a push from Dr. Riek Machar and various opposition groups to create a more inclusive agreement and revitalize the failed agreement. The government was implementing an agreement with Taban Dengai, representing the SPLM-IO, but Machar was saying that his ouster from the SPLM-IO and the government was illegitimate and unconstitutional as per the agreement. So what he then pushed for was a revitalized agreement, revitalizing the old agreement. And when the talks started happening, IGAD, which is a regional body based in the East and the Horn of Africa, brought together various political parties from across South Sudan to create the Revitalized Agreement on the Resolution of Conflict in South Sudan. The Revitalized Agreement. Now, why was it called Revitalized? Because people said that Machar's ouster in the conflict in 2016 essentially collapsed the agreement, and the government was not implementing the agreement correctly. And now people said that they want a more inclusive agreement. So what they did was they split the agreement to different factions. You had the SPLM incumbent government. This was known as the Incumbent Transitional Government of National Unity, SPLM-I Tugunu. Then you had the SPLM-IO. Then you had SOA, the South Sudan Opposition Alliance. Then you had the former detainees. Once again, remember the former detainees. Then you had other political parties. The interesting thing was this, that the SPLM-I Tugunu encompassed the SPLM-IO of Taban Dengai. The SPLM-IO of Taban Dengai was considered part of the SPLM-I Tugunu. The SPLM-IO, led by Dr. Riek Machar Tany, was its own. The agreement stated that there should be 5 vice presidents. to accommodate all these rival political factions. This agreement was endorsed by IGAD, and it was endorsed by regional players in South Sudan, and it was endorsed by the international community as to create an inclusive government and end conflict in South Sudan. So the belief is that if you can create positions for these political parties, they don't have an incentive to fight, and they'll be part of the government together as partners with the incumbent government. They can implement this agreement, bring peace to South Sudan, and make preparations for the elections. So the mandate of the Revitalized Transitional Government of National Unity, the agreement is there. We leave it in the link. You can read it. Was immediately end conflict in South Sudan. So it's called Resolution of Conflict in South Sudan, and prepare the country for elections. Now you have 5 vice presidents in South Sudan. You have the first vice president, Dr. Riek Machar 10, representing the SPLM-IO. You have the vice president, Dr. James Wani Iga, representing the SPLM. You have another vice president, General Taban Dengai, representing the SPLM. You have another vice president known as Hussein Abdelbagi Ayi, representing the South Sudan Opposition Alliance. And then you have a 5th vice president. It's a lady, the first lady vice president in South Sudan history, Rebecca Nyandeng de Mabior. She is the widow of the late Dr. John Garang de Mabior, who was the founder of the SPLM. Those are your 5 vice presidents. That's why you have 5 vice presidents in South Sudan. When does this end? Well, according to the agreement, this government, or the mandate of the unity government, is going to expire in December 2024 after elections are held. After elections are held, the winner of the election will then form his government. But right now, you have an agreement. That's why you have 5 vice presidents